I can't think of any place I'd rather be than right here tonight. It's a beautiful evening, Āsāḻha Pūjā. Very congenial, delightful monastic community that will be here for the Vasa. Great group of guests and visitors staying here. Day visitors coming. And here to just practice dhamma, reflect on the teachings of the Buddha, and to be with each other, to share this. What a great opportunity. And Āsāḻha Pūjā, I think pretty much everybody who's here would know that it's the recognition of the Buddha's first discourse, the Dhammacakka Sutta, which we chanted parts of tonight, excerpts from it, most of the meat of the teachings in Pali and English. It's a nice combination. So we not only get the Pali teachings, but a flavor of what they mean for those of us who don't speak fluent Pali. And just to remember and reflect on this core teaching, the first discourse that the Buddha taught a couple of months after his awakening, teaching this discourse to the 5 ascetics who had been his comrades, if you will, in the search. And the Buddha's having discovered it and bringing the teaching back to these 5 men who had become, who were to become his disciples with the culmination of this discourse. And just the profundity of this particular exposition, this first teaching that laid out the path, the Four Noble Truths with the Eightfold Path. It's a teaching that's often referred to as the elephant's footprint, in that the teaching of the Four Noble Truths contains all of the teachings in some form or another. All of the teachings that the Buddha subsequently passed on can be fit into some way within the Four Noble Truths. It's the basic core, the basic structure, the outline of where we can go and how to do it. In a way, it's we get involved so much in the teachings, the various teachings throughout the Sutta Pitaka, the collection of all of the Buddha's teachings that we were able to have recorded essentially and passed down through the years. We get involved with those and study them in detail and reflect on them in detail. But every now and then it's important to zoom out a bit to this broad teaching that really sets the basis for all of the rest of the teachings with some context. But on a night like this, many people have come together, and I think it's really important to just, as I say, zoom out a bit back to the broad perspective. Where are the teachings going? What is it that we're doing with them? And it can be very inspiring to do that. I find it very inspiring anyway. And the Buddha kind of, in other teachings, not right in this specific one, kind of lays out, in a sense, a description of the first noble truth, the truth of dukkha, the truth of unsatisfactoriness or suffering. When he remarks in reflection about samsara and the vastness of what we find ourselves in and lost in. It's a lovely, stark phrase of truth that he utters when he says, "From an inconceivable beginning, beings have been wandering and roaming on endlessly, obstructed by ignorance and fettered by craving." And that pretty much sums up many of our lives until we at least start to pick up this teaching. If we're so fortunate to do that, most of the people in the world don't even know of the existence of this teaching. And along with the rest of us, hopefully some of us to a slightly lesser degree, wandering on aimlessly, obstructed by ignorance, hindered by craving, fettered by craving. That kind of sums up the basic problem, that we're obstructed by our ignorance. We can't see clearly, so we keep on wandering, making the same mistakes, not seeing clearly enough to find a way out of the cycles of suffering that we keep on getting ourselves into. And it's all motivated by this fetter, this ball and chain of craving, this underlying tendency towards wanting or not wanting, or just general overall confusion. That's this ball and chain that keeps us anchored, fettered by craving. So in a sense, this is the beginning of the teaching, to recognize that this is the first noble truth, the truth of dukkha, the truth of suffering. And as you all probably know, all the Four Noble Truths have a duty associated with them, and the duty of this first noble truth, this truth of suffering, is to fully understand it. This is the problem. This is in the medical model approach to the Buddha's teaching, this is the diagnosis. The diagnosis of, there is suffering. And of course, the second noble truth of the cause of suffering is the cause of the illness. So you have the illness, the diagnosis, and then the cause. And the third noble truth being the fact that it's the prognosis, the fact that there can be an escape from this illness, there can be a cure to this illness. That's a good prognosis. And then the fourth is, of course, the treatment, the cure, the path leading to the end of dukkha, the Eightfold Path. But the first noble truth is this one that we have to fully understand before we can move on. We want to jump to number 3. We want to jump to the cessation of dukkha in the shortest possible way, but in a sense, there's really no shortcut. We can't avoid actually having to fully understand dukkha to begin with before we can move into abandoning the cause, developing the path, and realizing the goal, realizing the ending of dukkha. We have to fully understand. And it's kind of heart-rending when at least when I look back at my life before stumbling on the Buddhist path, moving into the Buddhist path, just the ways that we try to avoid this exploration of dukkha, this exploration of suffering, the knee-jerk reaction to find distraction when things don't feel right, to find a a remedy in the world of the senses, sensory experience, sense pleasures, or in the realm of becoming somebody important with a clear role in life, whether it's child, parent, sibling, or our job, our relationships, trying to find an identity within the realms of the world. And then in our moments of difficulty, despair, trying to just escape from it all through all the escape measures that we can possibly muster. Because we don't want to take the effort, make the effort, and possibly feel some pain by looking squarely at dukkha in the face, to fully understand it, to fully penetrate it. So we keep on dodging around through our lives. And so, we listen to all the promises of the world, the ways that we're told to find happiness, constantly repeated and blaring at us from all various news media, advertisements, all the messages from the world that we look at and say, here, this is the way to happiness. Do this, do that, get involved with this, buy this, become this. Pursue this. This will give you happiness. And there's all the coarse ways that are pretty obvious to most of us that we've learned don't really do it. And then there's also the more subtle ways, promises of, happiness forever in the perfect relationship, or even developing skillful ways of being in the world that bring wholesome results. These are good things in terms of producing good conditions. And we have to look at them in the long term too, to see if it's the full deal. I remember myself just buying into all of those messages and trying my best to find that sense of stability and happiness with all the promises that were being put out there as ways to do that. And, with a few unfortunate exceptions, for the most part, I was able to fairly skillfully do it and negotiate through and develop a fairly wholesome set of activities in life, and as I got a little bit older, feeling a little more skillful in it, and pretty much following the script, and doing what I thought would bring ultimate happiness, or at least the best that can be had in this world, and slowly realizing, or thinking, after developing skillful means, skillful methods, good relationships, good livelihood, feeling the benefits of that in sort of its fleeting way, and then feeling kind of, okay, now what? And that sense of dis-ease, slight dissatisfaction, something's not quite in tune. Even though I'm doing the best I can following these messages, something's not quite right. Doing that for a good 30 years at least, or at least the last 10 of those 30 years in my 20s to 30s with, my adult activities. Just doing what one needs to do. And then it wasn't until somewhere around the age of 30 or so that I stumbled on the Buddhist teachings and thought, okay, this is what I've been missing. This is pointing out in very clear teaching why I'm not experiencing full commit or a full experience of satisfaction, of a repleteness that I'm looking for. And essentially, it was this teaching on the exposition of the Four Noble Truths that made all of a sudden a whole lot of sense. And here was somebody who was saying plainly and clearly, look at the facts. It's what you've been pursuing, the way you've been pursuing it, as skillful as it might be, and as sometimes unskillful as it was. It's not the answer. You won't ever find an end to the dukkha, the suffering, by following the worldly ways. And eye-opening, very moving, coming across this teaching in general and this specific exposition of the Noble Truths. I think I can speak probably for many of us here, a life-changing discovery. So this first Noble Truth has to be fully understood, fully penetrated, and accepted, that this is where we find ourselves, and this is what from that cosmological viewpoint, this is what we've been doing since beginningless time, since no discernible beginning. And as the teaching goes, we chanted tonight that the various descriptions of this dukkha, this first noble truth, essentially boils down to the five khandhas as affected by clinging. So our experience of body and mind, and holding tightly to it, and looking for this kind of ultimate satisfaction in our bodies and in our minds, all the experiences that we call me, or who I am, when they're clung to with a sense of identity and a wish for this kind of fulfillment in that form, then that eventually leads in some way, shape, or form to this experience of dukkha. And then kind of following on that, the second noble truth is the cause of dukkha. What leads us to this clinging to ourselves, our bodies and our minds, is this craving that is looking for satisfaction within this body-mind experience. That's the driving force that moves us into this form of clinging to ourselves, our sense of self. Craving for the sense pleasures, for the becoming, and for the annihilation of things when they get difficult. The second noble truth, with the duty that we need to examine that force of mind quite clearly and to the point where we want to abandon it, the duty related to that second noble truth, abandoning the cause of dukkha, this craving, tanha. Again, it has to be fully understood, and the cause has to be fully experienced, so that we have this motivation to find a different way, find something that will lead us out of this craving and clinging. So that's the answer to being a being roaming and wandering in this samsara, obstructed by ignorance. This is the clinging to this body and mind as who we are and as a refuge point, and releasing ourselves from the fetter of craving, which is this driving force to keep us moving for satisfaction in that which is ultimately unsatisfactory, to abandon that. And then the third noble truth of the cessation of suffering, that's a possibility. We have that as a promise if we follow the path completely. The Buddha experienced it, he discovered it himself. And this discovery and his experience kind of burst that darkness that he himself also was caught in until his enlightenment. And in that final penetration, final release, with the complete abandoning of craving and the understanding, full penetration of clinging and dukkha, it opened the door. The door was opened, and he realized that the path that he had been following prior to his time as a samana, as a seeker, was not the path, and that he had discovered the path through his own efforts over 6 years of seeking and practicing on his own and not giving up. He broke through the veil of the darkness of samsara and was completely and finally liberated. And then he expounded this Eightfold Path, which is the vehicle. It's the medicine, the cure, and it's complete. What he discovered was a complete path, and it's a very neat system because the Four Noble Truths, the fourth Noble Truth is of course the Eightfold Path, but within the Eightfold Path, the very first factor is right view, which contains the Four Noble Truths. So it contains, both aspects contain each other within it. And if any of those path factors is missing, then it doesn't have the ability to take one completely to liberation. There's many good things that come from it, but all 8 factors have to be there, have to be present. And the Buddha actually remarks in some different ways in the teachings that if there are other paths that are proclaimed to lead to full liberation, then they must include all the Eightfold Path, all the 8 factors. And actually, he also remarked in one teaching that I remember that actually that doesn't exist outside of the Buddha's dispensation, outside of his teachings. At that time, it didn't exist in the world. But it was clever because he didn't come out and say, my way is the only way, but more just like, well, if there is a way to full liberation other than this, it must contain this, the Eightfold Path, which also includes the Four Noble Truths. So, and this is the path that has to be fully developed. That's the duty of the Fourth Noble Truth, to be fully developed so that the ending of dukkha can be experienced, can be realized. So that's kind of a little brief summary of what we chanted tonight in the Buddha's first teaching. There's another really wonderful different take on the Four Noble Truths that comes from a Thai Ajahn from, he was born in the late 1800s, 1880s, and lived, I think, almost to be about 95. His name was Ajahn Dun, and he was an early disciple of Ajahn Mun, so practiced mostly in the first part and middle part of the 20th century. I think he died in the 1980s at some point. But anyway, he wasn't extremely well known, but he was extremely well respected and was known for the straightforwardness and simplicity of his teachings. He didn't expound a whole lot of dhamma talks that were, written down or recorded in any way. More taught through example and through discussions and conversations with people, questions, answers. that kind of format rather than the formal teaching. He has some real gems which people might be interested in looking at. I think there's probably some copies. I know there's copies in the library and maybe even in the free distribution room of his teachings. Gifts He Left Behind is the name of the small booklet. It's a real gem. But anyway, one of those teachings is around the Four Noble Truths. And I'll see if I can remember the phrasing, but he rephrases them in just simple one-liners, the Four Noble Truths, in that, and he doesn't do them in the exact order. So this second Noble Truth comes first, in that the mind moving outside itself is the cause of dukkha. The result of the mind moving outside, the result is dukkha. So that's the first Noble Truth. The second Noble Truth is the cause, and the result is the first Noble Truth of dukkha. Moving outside, going outside. And then the next two lines are the mind seeing the mind is the path leading to the end of dukkha. The mind seeing the mind. And the result of the mind seeing the mind is the cessation of dukkha. So two aspects, the mind moving out, the mind going out, and the mind seeing itself, the mind going out being the cause of dukkha, and the mind seeing itself, experiencing, knowing itself, is the cause for the ending of dukkha. And it's a really lovely way of thinking about this, reflecting on the cause and the cessation of dukkha from the aspect of movement of mind. Because all of this craving that we know as the cause of dukkha, the forms of tanha, is this movement outwards from the clear knowing base of the pure mind, moving to an object to get involved with it, greed, hatred, delusion, steering the mind outwards from its pure, pristine knowing, the quality of knowing, unadulterated, steering it, pulling it out to the realm of the senses, sight, sounds, tastes, smells, tactile sensations, pulling it out into the realm of senses, looking for gratification, looking for a way out of difficulty, a distraction, sensual pleasure. And also the mental aspect. We think of the mind as something that's inside of us, but from the aspect of, or perspective of the mind, the still mind, it's also a movement out. We're moving out to thoughts or moving out to emotions. The mind is moving out to those kinds of experiences, mental experiences. Even though we think of them as contained inside, it's moving out to them, away from its clear, quiet, peaceful, alert, fully present, knowing quality, moving out into the experience of the six sense bases. So this is the cause of dukkha. And when we do that, when our mind leaves its quiet, clear presence, knowing quality, then we experience suffering in some form or another eventually. And then the mind seeing itself, the mind seeing the mind, being that not moving out, that non-entanglement with the sense bases, including the mind activities, including the objects of mind. So that very clear description that Ajahn Chah, also Lumpur Cha, uses his fundamental insight that he picked up from Ajahn Mun of seeing the mind separate from the mind objects. So there's still the flow of mind objects, all the things that come through the mind, but separate from that is this knowing quality, this awareness that can clearly see all of these objects in their true nature. And this is the path, essentially the path leading to cessation of dukkha. Of course, the Eightfold Path in its full description from the Buddha is all of those are supports for this ability to be able to separate the mind from the mind objects. It's the nuts and bolts of that being able to have the mind seeing the mind. But I've always really enjoyed that kind of alternate interpretation of the basic Four Noble Truths. It's quite profound. So this is the teaching that started it all and broke open the possibility of liberation from our wandering endlessly in samsara. What we chanted tonight didn't include the whole sutta, which kind of then branches off from the actual teaching that the Buddha gave, and to the description first, I think, of Kondanya, one of the disciples, having made the breakthrough, and had a glimpse of the goal himself, entering the stream through his realization that everything that arises has the nature to pass away. He realized that upon the culmination of the Buddha's exposition, and became the first being other than the Buddha to establish himself solidly in the practice, dhamma practice, irreversibly. He didn't completely realize the goal at that time, but became secure in the path. So that's mentioned in the teaching as well. And the reaction, and this basically set the teaching solidly in the world. The fact that somebody actually, other than the Buddha, was able to understand it. Because the Buddha, at first, was disinclined to go anywhere with his teaching, or with teaching after he had his realization. As the request for the Dhamma talk this evening explained, that it took the Brahma god Sahampati to come down to the Buddha and notice his disinclination to teach, and to say, excuse me, Venerable Sir, there are beings with just a little dust in their eyes, and they can understand this. They would be able to penetrate to the truth if you would please teach. And then the Buddha surveyed the world system with his divine eye, divine ear, his ability to encompass minds in his own mind, and was able to see, oh yes, there are some beings with just a little dust in their eyes, and decided to go ahead and teach. And did so. Kondanya entered the stream and set resolutely the teaching into the existence, started the dispensation that's lasted for more than 2,500 years now. And when that was set in motion, the wonderful description of it being transmitted up through the various realms of celestial beings, starting from the earthbound devas all the way up to the Brahma realm, very high God, realm of gods, and that the word spread, that the teachings had been the dispensation has started. And the description of that is so beautiful and so moving. And whenever we chant it in that full aspect of it, including that part of it, it just pretty much never fails to send chills up my spine. It's incredible, really, what happened there at that time with that teaching. And as the description goes, it's the 10,000-fold world quaked and trembled and shook, and the boundless radiance, sublime radiance, surpassing the power of the devas, appeared in the world. So greater than any of the celestial beings' powers or radiance, this teaching had its effect, had its reverberations through all of our experience. And here it is still today. Some people say that the teachings, the world is in decline, and that the true teachings are on the verge of disappearing. And it looks like there are sometimes signs that may be heading in that direction. And all things are impermanent, even the dispensation of the Buddha in the world. But I have to say that I still think that the true teachings are here, and that we have access to them, and that they are still having profound results in the world if we just tune ourselves into that and just feel incredibly fortunate and privileged to be able to be part of that. It's it's my refuge now. It's like having been on a boat on the sea without a rudder or an anchor, just kind of floating, drifting, and all of a sudden you have your rudder to steer you when there's movement, and your anchor to keep you in place and keep you grounded when times are still, when your boat isn't moving. The Dhamma is your anchor. It's my anchor, my rudder. Keep me moving in the right direction. And I just can't imagine ever wanting to be pulled away from it, no matter what comes along. There's lots of work left to do here, but it just feels. I feel incredibly fortunate to have stumbled on this teaching with an incredible amount of gratitude to our teachers, Lumpur Pasano, his teacher Ajahn Chah, all of the others in this dispensation that keep us moored and following a path that the Buddha described in this first teaching. So I'll leave it for that reflection tonight. Tonight.